Whenever you're ready. I think we probably have more people coming in, but today, last week I had mentioned that we were going to be talking about boarding schools today. I was wrong. We are not. That's next week. So today we're going to be talking about like the 17 and 1800s and history of Wampanoag Nation broadly, but also history of Mashpee during those time periods. I'm not going to be doing most of the talking today, or much really at all. We have two guests today, Darius Coombs and David Whedon, who are far more experts in these areas than I am. So we're going to start with Darius, and he'll do his presentation, then we'll move over to David, and then we'll do kind of a collective question section at the end. So, Darius.
How you guys doing today?
Hi.
Yeah. Does Thomas have a half day too, or just Mashpee?
Just Mashpee.
Just Mashpee today?
Okay, I can do it for you.
So, if you guys don't know me, Darius Coombs, Mashpee Wampanoag, I do cultural outreach for the Mashpee Wampanoag Education Department, and I've been studying my people for over 30 years, the culture and history. Invade, search out, capture, enslave, subdue, and vanquish anyone who is not Christian. That's Pope Nicholas V, head of the Catholic Church from 1447 to 1455. That's part of Doctrine of Discovery. And him saying that opened up the floodgates. So people can do, not just Columbus, but other folks too, can do whatever they want, wherever they want, if they want Christian people. And not just in the Americas, but all around the world. So that document, that statement right there, in 1452 he made. So made us look, not being human, not having a culture, not being people. Not just us, but other folks too. It gave the green light for other folks to come over and do what they wanted to do. So I had to start out with that first, right? Because that lays the foundation to what you're going to hear later on in this presentation. So.
I can do it from here if you want.
Do it? Yes. There it is, document. There it goes. I'm going to touch on this because every presentation I do, which I've done quite a few over the years, is you have to mention this. If you don't mention this, it's not fair to our people, what we've gone through. This is yellow fever, what we call it. It happened between 1616 and 1619, a year before the Pilgrims arrived here. What we know about this is skin turning yellow. What we know about this is people got open sores on their bodies. And what we know about this is that people died within 2 or 3 days once they got it. Common thought over the years, common interpretation was maybe smallpox. We don't think it was smallpox, but we know smallpox happened in 1623. We know it happened in 1633. Huge outbreak. People over the years have called it hepatitis. Disease control came out something about 15 years ago, and they're calling it leptospirosis. And what that is from the French trade ship coming over southern Canada, right, on the East Coast, they would have rats on the ships, right? And the rats would get off, and the fetus of the rats would get into the water system, create an infectious liver disease that spread along the coastline. Starts in northern Maine, right? Goes down the coastline, goes 30, 40 miles inland, and it stops dead in its tracks down in where Narragansett people started in Rhode Island. Any guesses why it stopped there? It starts in northern Maine, sweeps along the coastline. Why not go through Florida?
The Gulf.
Water might have something to do with it. Down there you got Narragansett Bay, and it's hard for disease to go over water. But we know a lot of people over in Nantucket, Cuttyhound, Pennakees weren't affected by that plague a whole lot. Another guess is Narragansett, Wampanoag did not have a best of relations. Not everybody, but a lot of people didn't like each other. And if you don't like each other during that time, you don't have that physical contact with each other. I've always stated, you can call it whatever you want. It doesn't matter to me. What I do know, it was the most devastating thing that ever happened to our people, period. To fully, like I said, I've been in for a long time, right? To fully understand the traditional and political structure I would have to hop into a time machine and go back before plague hit. Like I said, 9 out of 10 people died. And that's a rough guesstimate. Can you imagine the leaders we lost? Could you imagine the medicine people we lost? The structure we lost? For me, it's like a big puzzle, right? You got all these pieces, and you try to fit it together best you can. But any talk I do, I always have to mention this, because it's very important. First stage of colonization, right? Colonists coming here in 1620, but we had European people coming over here before that, right? We had the Dutch, we had the English, we had the French. And there's been terms put on these people in the textbook still today. They say, oh, they're fishermen, they're explorers, they're traders. If you gotta say that, what you have to add on is fishermen, traders, explorers, enslavers. All in one breath, right? Because that was normal for them to do. That was normal for Gomes go down to the Narragansett country in 1524 and take 50-odd native people over to Europe. That was normal for Tom's son, John Smith, his fishing captain, to come around Patuxent and take 19 Patuxent from there, go down Cape Cod, take 8 Nauset and Wampanoag, and bring them over to Europe as slaves. Now, what was the idea behind that? Let's bring these people to England, let's teach them how to speak the language, and let's bring them back as guides and interpreters. But while they were there, right, they were considered to be exotic specimens. They were plants around London, and a lot of us died. We had no built-up immunity to what other folks had, okay? So very few made it back. Squanto did. We know Epinal, the leader of what is called the Vineyard, did. And that's because he tricked them over there. He said, bring me back home, I'll show you where the gold's at. And they believed him. But that's very important, guys. You hear fishermen, explorers, traders, add on enslavers. I say that in a tone, right? I'm not getting mad, I'm not getting happy. But you say it in a breath that's the same, right? Because I've done a lot of speaking engagements, right? And if you get angry at a person, they shut down. They're not going to listen to you. Oh, you're trying to blame me for what my ancestors have done. No. So you try to be even tone. Now, can everybody do that? No, we can't. Because it's real for our people. It still hurts inside. So interpreting this culture is very hard for our people. It's not fake. We don't turn on 9 to 5. We're the people 24 hours a day. So it's still very damaging for our people. All right, what else we got here? Okay, the first science and force ceremonies, right? I did the study probably about 6 years ago, right? I looked at all the digitalized records of Mass Bay, which is Boston, Plymouth Colony. I looked at decade by decade by decade and what it meant for us as Native people. And you guys can do the same thing, right? You get these digitalized records. That's all you have to do is punch an Indian, or maybe savage, or heathen, and everything's highlighted. All these laws, right? And one of the first parts of colonization when they got here was religion. Let's take away whatever they got, because it's not real. Then we'll take them away the land and the children and women and men. But when it came to ceremonies, right? Well, I want to find out where this first started, right? When they recorded it. They wrote down everything. The English wrote down a whole lot of stuff, right? Because it was normal for them to write it down. Look at this law I found right here. November 4, 1647. It is ordered by the court that no Indian at any time powwow or perform outward words to the false gods or to the devils on English ground. They should be fined 10 pounds. I asked an English scholar, what does 10 pounds mean in the 17th century? He said, derives 10 pounds for an Englishman back then was half a year's pay. Could you imagine what it meant for us? And for us saying we can't do our ceremonies, that means we can't sing our songs, right, which is part of our ceremonies. And that's why where we're at today. We've got a lot of things gifted to us today by the Haudenosaunee. We got our language back, thanks to the woman to my left, who helped out a great deal. And today we're making songs in our language once again. But to have those originals, this is another court record. It's all together. Can I bounce back to this? Tom?
Sure, you wanna go for it?
Yeah, place of religion, right? Like I said, Christianity was one of the first things that was placed on us. And it happened first over here was Capawack Bay, known as Sayers Martha's Vineyard. You see praying towns popping up in the 1640s through the 1670s. There was probably about 35 praying towns between Mass Bay and Plymouth Colony. Eggertown, you guys know what Eggertown is? A man out there, me and my relative named Hyatt Coombs, right? He knew the King James Bible so well that it was preaching that to English people, their own religion. Okay? Now, people always say, I've heard this say on Mash Wampanoag, I've heard this say Aquina Wampanoag leaders. Christianity was good for us. If you're gonna say that, I'm not gonna make fun of anybody's religion, right? If you're gonna say that, you have to do your background research and explain that. Explain about the plague that we get hit by. Explain about those people we lost. Explain about those laws that forced our culture out. So we're looking for something to grasp onto. Hyatt Coombs, like I said, knew the King James Bible very well, but not everybody liked what he was doing. He was a Wampanoag leader over Chappaquiddick, right? And he called Hyatt Coombs to Chappaquiddick. He said, "What are you doing? We have our own ways of doing things." Punch him in the face. Okay? Hyatt Coombs, the son being Joel Hyatt Coombs, we'll talk about in a minute. He helped out with the King James Bible and also went to Harvard University. So you look at about 35 praying towns, right? We got Christian Town here, which is over Martha's Vineyard. And I was talking to a teacher of mine named Linda Coombs, and she said people are still living in Christian Town even in the 1800s. Still taking on Christianity, still having that belief. And that right over here to my right is the old Indian Mashpee meeting house. And that right there dates back to 1664, right? 1684. It's the oldest meeting house in the United States, period, what is known as the United States today. So you had a lot of preachers come through there, Lion Joe Amos, William Akers. And that was used for ceremony, marriages, meetings, and we still use that today. But praying towns, right? Here's a list of them right here. Mashpee was one, right? Natick was another. Natick was the first praying town in 1651. And these missionaries, right? Some of these names I'm sure you guys heard of. You heard of Gookin. You might have heard of Cottonwood, the Mayhews over the Martha's Vineyard. Actually, John Cottonwood went to around the Plymouth area, Patuxent, what's called Patuxent, back in the 1640s and 50s, and he described in his writing how the native people around that area still had their ceremonies, still were keeping things going. And it was very difficult to do during that time. John Eliot formed the first praying town in 1651, like it says Natick. And it was very strategic where they put these praying towns, right? You got Massachusetts, and where they put them, a lot of them were the outskirts of Boston, around. And why did they do that? They were afraid of the Mohawk. The Mohawk people located out west would come and invade sometimes. And the praying towns, as they were called the good Indians, would take that hit first. And actually, records show that a lot of these praying towns, Indians were captured and brought back to Mohawk country. So they were put there for a reason. Thanks. And here's two very valuable books. I should say books, actually. You got the Bible, right, King James Bible, in which John Eliot learned Wampanoag, hired on Wampanoag interpreters, and wrote the Bible in Wampanoag. True, Natana, one of the biggest things to help bring back the language, yeah, is the Bible. Aside from old records written in Wampanoag, some of the language families, elders who could speak some of the language. And we have that first edition in our draft today for our language project. That's pretty cool. Our language came full circle again, right? And over here, this is Tears of Repentance. How many guys have heard of Tears of Repentance? Yeah, only one? Tears of Repentance. Brody, you're good. Okay.
You shared it with us a few days ago.
If you haven't seen Tears of Repentance, go on Amazon and get it. Please do. Tears of Repentance, through Eliot's work of Christianity, he recorded all these native people's confessions, right? Either they're a Christian or not. He even said that. He's not qualified yet to be a Christian. But these people, in their own words, indigenous people around Massachusetts, they call Tears of Repentance because when they're writing, saying these words, their tears were going into the pages, right? So I got a very special treat for you today, guys. One of the first people to switch over to Christianity, they say, was Wabin, who was a native person located around the border between Natick and Boston. And we got my buddy over here, David Wheaton, who's going to speak on Wabin's behalf on his confession.
Then Wabin was called forth, whose confession was as followeth. Before I heard of God, and before the English came into this country, many evil things my heart did work. I wished for riches. I wished to be a witch. I wished to be a sage. Then when the English came, still my heart did the same things. When the English taught me of God, I coming to their houses. I would go out of their wood, of their doors. In many years I knew nothing. When the English taught me, I was angry with them. But a little while ago, after the great sickness, I considered what the English do, and I had some desire to do as they do. And after that, I began to work as they work. And then I wondered how the English come to be so strong to labor.
And that's just part of it, guys. It goes on a lot more. He also explained about, he asked, his name was Jackson, if him speaking of Wampanoag and praying, would their gods understand him? And Jackson says, yeah, he understands all languages. But please do check out that book, Tears of Repentance. And what he mentioned about that plague coming through, even when the Pilgrims first got here, right? For one, I want to mention, this just passed, right? You hear about 50 years of peace from 1620 to 1675, 70s, right? It wasn't a 50 years of peace. It was ahead in Plymouth Colony in 1623 already. And that was Peckswood's head. So that was 2.5 years after they just landed. But yeah, this is a great read. It's hurtful. You can feel the people's pain, what they're going through. Even when the plague happened, they'll say to the native people, right, around Patuxent, Plymouth, if you don't do what I say, I have the plague underneath the house. I can unleash it on you. Because we had never, ever experienced anything so devastating back then. We didn't know where it came from. We had the common cold, we had eye disease, we had smoke, we had lung disease, but nothing that would come in and wipe you out within 2 or 3 days. Now, what we got next? That's Wabin's confession. I mentioned this not because he's my relatives, but he's Hayek's son, right? Harvard being English and Native College. And there were the first 5 graduates for Native people in 1665. Caleb graduated, 3 of them monks left school, and 1 died 2 weeks before graduation. And the one who died, who's considered to be valedictorian, he was Joel Hayek's, my relative. What happened to him, he went home to the vineyard 2 weeks before graduation. On the way back, they stopped in Nantucket, and they got killed. And he might have got killed by his own people, because there was still a lot of traditionalists still living on Nantucket. But what Harvard did back in 2007 is they invited my family up there and gave us a posthumous degree in his name, which is kind of cool. Okay. Okay, Deer Island. This is what happened right before the war, right? Now, like I said, you may hear me mention the good Indians, right? The praying Indians. But guess what? By the time war hits in 1675, the bloodiest war per capita in New England, you're the good Indians, but you're still Indian. So you're caught in the middle. You aren't traditionalists anymore. You're not English. You're right in the middle. But by English eyes, you're still Indian. So what happened to these people, these praying Indians, is they were sent on islands off of Massachusetts. They were sent to Deer Island. They were sent to Clark's Island off Plymouth. A lot of people don't realize that. And what we've done over the years is sacred paddles to visit them and do ceremony over there for them. Do what they had to give up to be while we're here today. What they did, what they did. So I always have to mention that. King Philip's War. Before we mention King Philip's War, can we go back to that slide, Tana? With the yeah.
Tell me when it's done.
We know King Philip's War. We know King Philip's War starts in 1675, right? I'm not sure if you guys know about this record right here. This is produced by Plymouth Colony, September 13th, 1671, right? This is very important. You saw the gradual decline of relations between the two people in the 1660s. It was awful. Look into these records. And by 1671, September 13th, Metacomet, if you don't know who King Philip was Massasoit's second son. They called him Philip. His original name was Metacomet. And if you're a native person of high stature, they'll give you English names of high stature, so they'll call him King Philip. So he goes, right? He runs, he's getting really upset what Plymouth Colony is doing to him. He's getting really upset. So he goes to Mass Bay and asks for their help, right? Over land issues, over they can't have the musket anymore. And Phil literally asked Mass Bay, can you help me? Oh yeah, no Mass Bay does? Sure, I can help you. Actually, we're gonna meet in Plymouth. We'll get everybody on board. They go to Plymouth. What they do is they get Mass Bay, Plymouth Colony, and the other big government, Connecticut, all together. And they make Philip sign this right here. Philip, my counsel and my subject, and know of ourselves being subject to the King of England, I promise to pay £100 to Plymouth over 3 years. And you guys remember what 20 pounds meant for an Englishman. I promise to send the governor 5 wolf heads yearly. If difference comes between my people and the English, I promise to rectify in court in Plymouth. I do promise not to make war with Plymouth. I promise not to sell any land I have here at present by application of the government of Plymouth. So they literally tie his hands. And he's really upset by this time. All right, we can go back to that slide. So June 1675, war breaks out. John Sassoon, being a plain Indian, tells Plymouth Colony what Metacomet's planning on doing. John Sassoon, he didn't end up too good. Metacomet found out what he did, and he was found drowned in Apsawampka Pond. Metacomet sent his men after him. It's considered, like I said, to be the bloodiest war per capita in New England, right? A lot of battles, Turtle Falls, Deerfield, the Narragansett Swamp Massacre, a lot. A lot of people lost their lives being English or native, right? Benjamin Church was led by a native guide to find Metacomet, and they found him. They found him at his home in Mount Hope, known as Pokanoket, Sowams. And when they found Metacomet, they dismantled his body limb by limb. They just took his head and brought it to Plymouth Colony and put her on a post for 20 years. They did that same thing to Weedamo, a woman chief. She drowned going across the Taunton River. They took her head and put her on the Taunton Ring. But going to back to Metacomet, they said, you have a wife and he has a wife and a boy. We can't kill them because that's not right. But what we can do is sell them out for slaves. And that's what they did. So you heard me mention slavery even before the Pilgrims arrived here. So slavery is nothing new. But now it became fully legal, right? What do we got next in time? Slavery and indentured servitude, yep. Slavery, I can't think of a silver lining on slavery. The best I can come up with is what my folks around here do. They're going to be doing it this June. They're going to Bermuda, in which a lot of us were sold off to after the war. Slavery was legal, scalping was legal, servitude was legal. And a lot of these people down in Bermuda that were sold still have their cultural identity. They still know who they are. So they come up one year to their powwow, and we visit them another year. So this year we're going down there. Imagine all those years and still have your cultural identity as a slave. A lot of time what the English did after the war, if you're a man, you're sold off to slavery. If you were a woman, you were put as a servitude. You were put in people's houses. and cleaning, doing whatever else has to be done, or what their masters want them to do. So what I'm going to do here, guys, this is my final slide. Mark Charles, look him up, guys. Very native man from out west. He does doctorate discovery, says it very well. Look up Tyler Rogers, guys. Narragansett man. What's that?
This is the
Yeah,
one.
this is the one right here. Very intelligent, Tyler Rogers. Heard him speak a lot. And I was just going over one of his videos today. That's how he puts the information across. It's not pretty for our culture, but he puts it in a way that people get it. And it's pretty cold, harsh, but people understand it and respect it. So I'm going to tell you a little story about Patience Boston, right? Patience Boston. She was a Nauset Wampanoag woman. If you don't know what Nauset is, you think of Nauset as a town today. That was one of our Wampanoag communities, 1 out of 70. And that's how you identify yourself back then. If you went back in time, you went up to somebody, say, around here, ask them what they were, they'll say, I'm Massabee, what are you? They'll expect you to know this is Wampanoag country, all right? Patience Boston, that was her name, right? She was born in 1711, Nauset Wampanoag. Her mom died when she was 3 years old. And that's when she was put in servitude, at 3 years old, okay? She literally bounced from house to house, resold, all up and down Massachusetts East Coast. She eventually was sold up Maine, York, Maine, right? And when she was sold, by that time she was early 20s, and she was really frustrated. Really, I would be too. But what life she had to live. So she was plotting on killing her master, but she couldn't find the arson to do it. She tried burning down his barn. But she also knew the master had a grandson that he really loved. And the master, the grandfather, left that baby with Patience quite a bit. And Patience in her writings wrote down that she cared for this little boy, because she was always with him. But she was so hurt inside, she felt like she had to do something. And the boy got drowned. She drowned the boy. And what happened to her, she got jailed in York, Maine. She got jailed. And for her, and they wanted her to switch to Christianity to get redemption. And what she said she did. Once she got out of jail, she was hung, she died. So, and that's what we went through, you know, that's part of our life right there, our history. So, thank you guys for listening. And you guys enjoy David coming up back. He's going to go later on to the 1700s and to the 1800s.
Thank you, Dwayne. Oh, what's this?
Hello everyone, Winnikisak. Hello everyone, my name is David Whedon. I'm the National Wampanoag Tribe's Tribal Historic Preservation Officer and Tribal Councilman. Just for full disclosure, I am also the chairman of the Board of Selectmen, and I sit on the Cape Cod Commission as the tribe's Native American representative on the commission. So I've been asked to bring us from the late 1700s through the 1800s to the 1900s. And so as part of that, we're going to pull up in a moment, there's a timeline that's pretty succinct. It's a very kind of good resource to just go to start your research on the sequence of events that have happened to us over the years. And that's good. So this is a bulleted timeline of very notable historic events. So what the early settlers envisioned for Mashpee was set aside lands for praying Indians. So there were 69 praying towns, 69 villages, but there were, I believe, 19 praying Indian towns within the Commonwealth of Massachusetts. The way they envisioned these praying towns was that they would put all the praying Indians that remained on reservations. This predates the reservation systems that we're familiar with today. They were called plantations, and then the sequence of events to self-governance and things was to, and forced assimilation was that they put them on these Indian plantations, teach them how to self-govern while they're propagating Christianity, and as they learn the colonial form of governance, then they would eventually become an Indian district. After an Indian district, they would progress to becoming a municipality, unlike any other in the Commonwealth. And so that was kind of the natural succession that they thought. What they didn't calculate for is our cultural teachings and the conflict between the different value systems. And so in that, even today, you still see a lot of the values that we were taught culturally that are still retained, where we don't have the same wants. And, you know, our people actually, as long as you have food on the table and a roof over your head, life is pretty good. And, you know, you want to be left alone to do those things and integrate yourself with everything, your surroundings, and spend time in the woods and hunt and fish and things like that. And family's most important. And so, you know, in our way, we're on a spiritual journey, and, you know, so we're not obsessed with our places in society and accumulative wealth and generational wealth and those things. It's actually inconsistent with our cultural teachings to focus on those things. And so that has always progressed throughout the years and still is retained today, to where, you know, we don't have the same value systems. So that whole idea of assimilation hasn't quite worked out the way it was envisioned. And so along with that, 1685, it was actually, Mashpee was set aside as earlier, prior to that, in 1620, there was, the chiefs got together and set aside land. It was actually 75 square miles that was supposed to be retained by tribal members that wanted to listen to the word of gospel and entertain that thought. And so in 1785, 100 years later, 1785, it was actually affirmed through the colonial court through a title and deed that restricted the lands for the proprietors, that being the members of the tribe, in perpetuity, never to be alienated from or taxed or sold unless there was a unanimous vote at a meeting held specifically for that purpose. Is kind of the how the terms and conditions of that title and deed. And so that was entered into the colonial court through the colonial process, no different than any of the other titles that created the municipalities in the Commonwealth in southern New England. And so with that, that created the Mashpee district and Mashpee plantation. It progressed to a district after they had done self-governance to some extent. But then in 1740s, they appointed, the Mass General Legislature, colonial courts appointed overseers, and the overseers were tasked with conducting the affairs of the town. And so they wouldn't let any natives interact with non-natives and sell off land or lease land or sell off wood or do any of those things. And so they controlled that. And so, and they also indentured the people out. That was their job as overseers. And so as the overseers, they had a lot of power and control over people. They were indenturing children out for, you know, anywhere from 3 to 8 years at a time. The whaling, all this stuff, and this went on for quite a while. So until the 1760, Reuben Cognew, who was a teacher within the school systems here in Mashpee, he was actually half Mohegan and had come up here and was teaching our children. He actually went to England, and his journey is actually an interesting one. I asked you to research that. It was an interesting one where he set out from Providence, Rhode Island on a ship and ended up going astray. They got caught in a storm and ended up on Hispaniola and ended up in Jamaica and had to finagle his way because they were trying to sell him into slavery, even though he was a delegate going to England and just caught a ride. ended up talking to the military and getting them to take him over to the King England, and he actually advocated and lobbied with King George to actually force the colonial courts to extend a form of self-governance and stop with the overseers. He was looking for autonomy for the Mashpee Wampanoag people. And so in 1763, that was afforded. That's the same time as the Paris Treaty and things like that, where they actually recognized tribes west of the Mississippi as sovereigns, and you had to enter into treaties and things like that. That's when that started to happen in some of the Plains tribes. And so Mashpee was kind of ahead of the game, where we were in 1760, we actually were, it was a limited autonomy, where in 1763 we established our own form of elected officials. It's much like our governance now, where we had a board of selectmen style of government, and it had 5 representatives, 3 of which were native, 2 had to be non-native. I think the clerk and treasurer had to be actually non-native, handle money. And, so the other 3 were elected by the proprietors, that was really progressive. I don't think you're seeing that anywhere else in Indian country and anywhere in minority populations where they afforded that level of autonomy. And so from that period on, Mashpee was self-governing, but then it was repealed. And so what's consistent throughout our history is that we're always advocating for self-governance and autonomy in that self-governance. It's our longest struggle, and still to this day is the irony that we're still kind of fighting those things to this day. Leading up to after 1760, you can scroll down a little bit. That brings us up to like 1770. So now there's tension. I'd like to read an excerpt from. So this is called it's a petition to the Massachusetts officials and the current regime. Is titled "An Infringement of That Freedom to Which, as Men, They Were Justly Entitled." And it reads, "At the commencement of the late Revolution, when a high sense of civil liberty and the oppressive policy of an arbitrary court roused the citizens of America to noble and patriotic exertions in defense of their freedom, we anticipated the time when a liberal and enlightened spirit of philanthropy should extend its views and its influence to the increase of liberty and social happiness among all ranks and classes of mankind. We supposed a just estimate of the rights of man would teach them the value of those privileges of which we were deprived, and that their own sufferings would naturally lead them to respect and relieve ours. Impressed with these sentiments, and animated by a portion of that ardent sense of freedom and love of independence which characterized our ancestors, we voluntarily entered the crimson fields of battle and freely mingled our blood with that of the early martyrs to the cause of this country." And with that, our people served in greater numbers than most other communities within the Commonwealth. Massachusetts and Connecticut had more people that served per population in the Revolutionary War than the other New England colonies. Just little tidbit of facts there. Our people served even higher in those numbers within the Commonwealth. They served at the highest rates. It was actually 19.7% of our men left to serve in the Revolution, because when they sold the idea of freedom, they sold it collectively, that we'd all share in the same civil liberties and appreciate the same things equally. And it's ironic that we still haven't seen that as Native people to this day. It's never been fully afforded. And so, only 2 people came back from, only 2 of our men were returned. So they gave the ultimate sacrifice, those 22, the 20 of the 22, to that cause. And so, if you scroll down a little further, that's good. So in 1822, there was things going on in the West, and the Indian removal periods and things were starting. And there's actually, the Morse report considered taking the Native Americans from Mashpee here, the tribe, and relocating them out to Oklahoma. But the economy was so reliant on the indentured servitude. Our involvement in the whaling, our people, our women served as domestics within our homes. They served as midwives. They helped deliver the children. We were essential to the economy. And so a lot of the powers that be, some of the high and influential people, actually lobbied and advocated for us to remain. And so in the other part was culturally, we're of this land and we need this land. Our reliance on the waters, for a time period they referred to us as the South Sea Indians, because that's our relationship. We are so reliant and culturally on the waters that surround us here on Cape Cod. And so in the Morse report, they said that they wouldn't take us from here because if we remove them from the sea, they will die. That's the level of interaction and reliance that we have on the sea and the relationship for sustenance purpose, culturally, spiritually, the connections to our surrounding environment. And so they left us here. And, we participated in the whaling industries, we participated in cranberry bogs, a lot of the leaders that went out into the world and traveled on the ships. You had a hard choice as a young person. You only went as far as the 6th grade typically. And then you had to go out and be indentured out in order to pay off debts of your family. And so with that, children were indebted out anywhere from 3 to 8 years. So you were either a domestic, and every Anglo family in Massachusetts had a native servant within the southeastern Massachusetts, most every family. And so a lot of our children were going out and being indentured. And so with that, you had a choice: either you're going to work on at somebody's house as an indentured servant, or you are indentured out on a whaling ship, which is a little bit adventurous, very dangerous. But a lot of our folks chose the sea. And so our men would go out and start at a young age and work their way up through the ranks, but the overseers that were still, so they took appointed autonomy and then they took it away, and then they appointed and took it away. I mean, the history's just riddled with this behavior of giving it, taking it back, always changing the rules, and in which we play by. And so our folks, when they went out to sea, the money wasn't their own. When they came back, the overseers actually would get the money, and then you'd have to pay off the people that carried the debt, the non-natives. And so, there's actually a ledger over at the the Crocker House. I forget the name of it. Over in Cotuit, right there at the light. There's the Cahoon Museum. Yes. They actually have a ledger from one of the Crockers, I believe, that was an overseer at one time, and it actually has a lot of the debt that they carried and names and how much and things of that nature. It's very interesting to read, to put it in perspective, the oppression and how indebtedness was used as a tool to disenfranchise us of our lands, our property, our freedoms, and things of that nature. And so, this continued on, leading up to 1830. In the 1830s, there was a lot going on in throughout the country. And down in Georgia, you had the Marshall decisions and Indian law. The foundations of Indian law started with the John v. McIntosh versus the state of Georgia and the Cherokees. And those cases are some of the early foundings of Indian law. And our people were aware of those because after that, they started writing petitions and they referenced what was going on down in Georgia with the Cherokees and how they've been, it was afforded to them that, only Congress has the right, through the Constitution, only Congress has the right to, because of the Non-Intercourse Act, which was, I think, first developed in 1790-ish, and then periodically every 3 years or so they revised it and re-implemented. The language never really changed. The Non-Intercourse Act states that only the federal government has the right to negotiate and allow and transfer tribal resources. States, because of their sovereignty, is based on their sovereignty. And so, states aren't able to do it, municipalities aren't able to do it. It's a trust responsibility of the federal government. And that was the foundation of trust responsibility as we see it today. And so, you know, after the 1832, the Georgia versus Cherokees and the McIntosh decision, you have what you call the Marshall trilogies, and that defines Indian law, early Indian law. And so when Massachusetts in the 1830s, you know, they took away the full proprietorship and made Native American citizens, voting citizens. And so they divided up all the land was held in common up until that point. There was some land transactions that sold off. Cotuit, Santuit was sold off for a kettle and a hoe. That's why we have the restaurant, Kettle and a Hoe. Walk White was actually part of the original Mashpee. The Mashpee proper actually went all the way out to Spectacle Pond and Chase Lane and went the other direction all the way to the Mawson's Mills River, what we call the Cotuit River, which we call the Mawson's Mills River now. That was the 75 square miles. And then it got diminished down to 25, and then we have what's now today, after towns annexed in the 1700s, late 1700s, you have today, what you have 16 square miles left of Mashpee. And so, but the land was always supposed to be held in perpetuity, held in common by the proprietors. So in the 1830s, they divided all of the land. They wanted us to be more productive members of society, which it was an agrarian culture at the time. So everybody was supposed to farm and then sell all your goods and, you know, animals, farming and all this, and then, you know, contribute monetarily and have money to pay for things. Natives only grew as much as you needed to eat. You know, we didn't grow for, you know, accumulative wealth. So that didn't really work out. And so then they changed the law in 1832. 1834, there was a gentleman by the name of William Apis that came to town. He was actually Pequot and traveled up here, and he started preaching. At that point in time, we had an overseer by the name of Phineas Fish. Phineas Fish was very oppressive and had some really shady dealings. And our meeting house had been moved over from Bryant's Neck over to where its current location now. It was built in 1684, 1710-ish. It was moved over to its present location. And he wasn't allowing any, that was built and paid, the resources to build it was provided through the propagation of gospel, and it was for the specific purpose of propagating gospel to the Native Americans of Mashpee. And so he was preaching in there, and he wasn't allowing natives to come in and listen to the sermons. It was all non-native, it was a congregational church, and it was all non-native congregation. And so the actual natives that were obliged gospel and things, they were actually meeting under an oak tree off by the Baptist church over by the historic center of town. And it was a gentleman by the name of Blind J.O. Amos, who was legally blind from childhood, that his mother would read the Bible to him, and his talent was he was able to recite whole passages from the Bible from memory, and was considered legally blind. But he grew up here. He was a born and bred Mashpee tribal member. And so, you know, the people were really receptive to hearing his sermons as a member of the tribe. And so he did really well. Blind Joe Amos hooked up with William Apis, and when he came, and William Apis was more of an activist, and so he would actually get everyone fired up and said, you know, you guys should be fighting for your civil liberties and rights, and you should have this right, that right. And you know, he recognized that the overseers were oppressive and selling off tribes' resources and woods and things like that. So they had what they called the woodlot riots, or the wood revolt. And so there was some wood being sold off that Phineas Fish was selling off, and they flipped over, a few of the men flipped over some of the carts and wouldn't let the wood leave the lot, and they ended up getting arrested. The court in Boston said, you know, you have to go before the magistrate. The magistrate was one of the actual Phineas Fish's petitioners, parishioners from Cotuit area, a non-native, and they actually threw him in jail, and they got the short end of the stick on that. And so, you know, and they were just trying to exercise their rights to retain their resources. They were Mashpee resources to be held in common and should only be sold to benefit us, not benefit the overseers. And so, you know, over the years, some of the overseers were granted 400 acres here and 400 acres there for their families, and it was at a great cost that these overseers were doing business in the town of Mashpee, and we were always oppressed. And so the fight to overthrow that was long-standing. And in 1870, so in 1834, they actually appointed the full Board of Selectmen. We voted our own people, and that was kind of very similar to what we have today. There's still meeting minutes and things that capture that. Being in the East, everything's very well documented. It's all out there, and things I'm citing, I'm kind of giving a summarized version. And so in 1869, they sold off, they removed the restrictions of selling off land, and they could lease lands to anyone. And so this was done through the Massachusetts General Court. And so there was 3,000, 5,000 acres still held in common by the proprietors, and the rest had been parceled out in the early 1860s, I believe, and it had been parceled out so that every tribal member that was over the age of 21 received 60 acres. And so it wasn't contiguous. There was 20 acres here, 20 acres there, so it was checkerboarded all over. But we still have a historic map showing those allotments. And so that was the allotment period. And in when you get up to the 1869, they took the remaining lands and were able to sold those off. They lifted the restrictions. And then in 1870, they incorporated the town. Now this all is in violation of the Non-Intercourse Acts of 1795 forward. It's still in the Constitution today, pretty much the same language as the original language. That only Congress has the ability to sell off tribal resources and things. And so in 1976, we ran the town because the town was still predominantly Native Americans all the way up into the 1940s. And then in the 1940s, there's taxation and things, and a large amount of our land was being purchased by developers, and they were buying everything up. Everything was done through short title and quick claims and things like that. They'd give you money, pay off your back debt, and walk away with a whole massive amount of land. And so we started to lose the population demographic started to shift, and we started to lose our seats in town governments. But up until the 1940s, the town was ran by tribal members. We held all the seats in town government. We held all the seats in the school systems, the police, the fire. All that stuff was, when you look at the census of 1940s and 1950s, 90% of the town was listed Indian. Most everyone was Native. And just to put things in perspective, in 1620, when they created the 25 square miles to be held in perpetuity for natives, there was roughly 250 tribal members. So if you do the math proportionately, how much land to person that was to now, we actually applied for 300 acres with 150 in Mashpee and 170 in Taunton. And there's roughly 3,000 tribal members. Is less than 1/10 of an acre per person. And so, it's not consistent with our cultural ways, but the town aggressively sold off land. In 1976, there was, we saw all the development happening, and we actually sued the town of Mashpee to get the land, to try and slow down and stop the development. We sued based on the title and deed, and the court ruled that we were no longer a tribe. Through forced assimilation, the tribe was, it was a tribe, it wasn't a tribe, it was a tribe, it wasn't a tribe. At that point in time, in 1976, we were not a tribe by the federal definition. So therefore, the title and deed did not apply because it applied to Indians and the Mashpee tribe. And so that was a result of that case. That shifted the tribe's direction to where we shifted to pursue federal recognition. And it took over 35 years to acquire the federal recognition. In 2007, we were successful in our petition. It was granted federal recognition, and then in 2016, we received federal land into trust, September of 2015. And then it was challenged by the following administration in 2016, to where, that's been somewhat resolved. There's still some legal hurdles, but hopefully that doesn't get any traction and our lands are secured. But it's only a very minimal amount of land. You know, in order to be a sovereign government, a lot of your sovereignty is based on your jurisdictional authority. And so 300 acres is a very diminished level of sovereignty when it comes to your jurisdictional exercise of your sovereign laws and governance, self-governance. And it doesn't, it's insufficient to effectively manage your need for tribal housing and services and programs and things of that nature. So that's my spiel. And any questions?
We can open questions to Dries or David, so.
Just looking at the timeline, I was reading the one from 1869 where it says the Wampanoag tribal members as state citizens. That's just 1 year before the 15th Amendment of 1870, where African Americans got the right to vote. During this timeline, you're in your own land, in your own country, were you allowed to vote in presidential elections? When was that established? Was it taken away or was it added?
In federal elections, I think it was later.
Later.
But even the Civil Rights Act excluded tribes. If you read it, it actually names tribes out, Indians. It excludes Indians. It's afforded to everyone except Indians.
Thank you.
Yes, ma'am.
I was wondering about, are there any other tribes in this that had their land, put up to the numbers, like, was it Mashpee, or, I mean, because we hear a lot about other tribes and they have the large reservations. Was this a unique thing to Mashpee?
So a lot of your Indian policy was developed around what Massachusetts was doing, how they managed the Indians in the Commonwealth. Massachusetts, because it was an early colonial government, it has a lot of political influence even to this day. A lot of your Indian policy was developed with the involvement of some of your Ivy League institutions like Harvard and Yale that are long-standing institutions. If you look at over some of the people that have made their way to federal government level positions, they still come out of Harvard. Harvard has a lot of political influence, and from early days to now. So with that, you know, the Allotment Act, or the Doss Act as it's called, Senator Doss was from Lowell, Massachusetts. Grover Cleveland had a house over in Gray Gables. He used to come to Mashpee all the time. He used to come here, he would hire John Adequin, and John Adequin would show him around and take him and be a scout and take him out on fishing and hunting expeditions. He spent quite a bit of time here. He stayed at the Hotel Adequin over where the community garden is. And he would fish the lake. Grandpa Bordley would have the paddle boat, and they would go out on the paddle boat and travel around the lakes and circle around the islands on the paddle boat that used to be used on Mashpee Wakeby. And then they started, and they also used to like to go fishing over at Follies Camp down on the Mashpee River. Just as you go onto 28, they would fish over there. That was a great trout, Yellowbrook trout fishing spot for fly fishing. But then they turned them on to fishing for saltwater fish and bluefish and stripers, and because it's a bigger catch, they stopped coming to Mashpee. But they were very familiar with Mashpee and the goings-ons of Mashpee. But yet, so that allotment period happened to us in 1834, and I think allotments for the Doss Act, they happened like, I think 30 or 50 years later. So it was based on what they did here in Mashpee. And then it was repealed, because in 1827, John Collier had traveled the country and went to all the Indian reservations. This predates the BIA, Bureau of Indian Affairs. It was the U.S. Senate Commission on Indian Affairs. John Collier took it upon himself to go around to all the country and visit the reservations after the Doss Act, and he saw how destitute they were because they had no land. And so he came back, advocated to Congress and the U.S. Commission on Indian Affairs, and through 1927, 1928, there was a series of reports and findings where they commissioned what later became the Brookings Institute, which is still around today. It was called by another name, a different acronym. And the Brookings Institute commissioned, they commissioned the Miriam report through the Smithsonian, and that was commissioned through an act of Congress, the Senate Commission on Indian Affairs, to to go out and study the Indians. And that's where there's a lot of reports and data that come out of that. And when you read over the Morse Report, and that influenced the New Deal or the Indian Reorganization Act of 1934. It was a result of the 1927 hearings and things, the Collier Report, the Merriam Report, all led up and fed into what you have today, the 1934 Indian Reorganization Act. And so in that, you have Section 17, the ways in which you can get federal recognized, unless you're a treaty tribe that you have, inherent rights through a treaty that was signed as legal binding documents, treaties, which was a lot primarily west of the Mississippi. East Coast tribes in the east didn't really have treaties as much. It wasn't a mechanism used as much. And then, so, in Section 17 and Section 16, Section 16, you can petition for federal recognition through the federal government and, the established Bureau of Indian Affairs. They changed that process as a result of Mashpee's case because it shouldn't take 35 years. There was a lot of people advocating and lobbying against us and holding up our stuff because, to your point, if we were advocating for land and federal recognition out in the Badlands, we would have had a long time ago. But it's Cape Cod. Nobody wants us here. And so, they rather deal with you. They like to read about you in the history books. They like inviting you to affairs, Thanksgiving time, fall. But the rest of the year, it's kind of they don't want to deal with you in the present. And so, that's kind of been the relationship. And so, but under Section 16, you can petition to become a federal recognized tribe, and then you have to meet several different criteria. It's very complex criteria. Or you could be incorporated as Section 17, which is like a municipality is incorporated, so you're a corporation and a corporate entity, and you can be federally recognized that way. Both ways allow for a land into trust and all that stuff, and they're different. Nowadays they're used in different ways. They are still very much utilized, but we were essentially doing that back in the 1800s because we were operating in a municipality. We had a board of selectmen. We had your treasurers. The same way we do things today. We have town meetings and all that stuff. We were doing that in the mid 1800s. And so to the forced assimilation, up until 1850s, 50% of the homes were still wigwams. For whatever reason, you couldn't get trained carpenters come in and build stick frame structures in Mashpee. So 50% of our homes were still wigwams in the 1850s. So we didn't just roll over and adopt Christianity and turn our back on our original teachings. It was a hybrid approach where we were listening, but we still lived our own way. Daniel Mandel, who is he's a heck of a researcher, has a lot of different writings out there. His information is really well researched. He explains that in one of his books, and then he also still tells of the fact that Mashpee was unique in that all the other 19 praying Indian towns, if you went to those towns, you couldn't distinguish them from a non-Indian praying town because the way in which they were structured. So in the colonial towns, you start off with your green, and then you have your church. And then everything's based off of that. Your main street and all your developments based off of that main street and then radiates out from that nucleus. Mashpee wasn't developed in that way. Mashpee was developed where our people were still here and we still inhabited all our own original home areas of habitation. So it was, around South Mashpee, Mashpee Neck, resources, where there were resources around Mashpee Lakes Pond, around Shuman, around Johns Pond, or along the Mashpee River, around the Santuit River. These were all our ancient villages. And, that's where we continued to live because those are the areas that fed our families and provided for us, and where we knew where to get all the medicines and things of that nature. In my mother's time, she remembered when she would travel around and check on the elders. When she got out of school, she would walk around and visit elders just to wellness checks. It made her feel good to engage with them. And she remembered how, like in all the homes, they had medicine hanging from all the ceilings. They still were practicing traditional medicine, in her time period. And she was born in 1934. There's, up until recently, with each generation, we lose a lot of information. And so with that, there's a lot being lost, but it's remarkable what we've retained in the 400 years of forced colonization.
Can I just add to that
Yes, sir.
really quickly before you? As far as allotments, to your original question, that here, allotments often were, as David was saying, like lost because taxes were paid off by, Joe who came into town and wanted that land, right? In other areas, allotments that were given, they're under federal trust, so it's not like, okay, now I've got these 80 acres or whatever was given to me, and now I can do what I want with those 80 acres. They're in trust, and they're like bequeathed to descendants from there. So like people who are maybe my age, for example, now might have ownership of like 0.5 acres somewhere because of what's, after 200 years or whatever of family line. So there's not really, like there is still ownership, but it's useless, right? Because what do you do with, 40 acres that you share with 200 other people that maybe you know and maybe you don't know, even though you're related. So different results in different areas, but still, equally as damaging in terms of what, like the loss of ability to actually interact with the land, right, in a meaningful way.
And most of us can connect to a lot of those areas, so the tribe's trying to set up a GIS program at the tribe and try to create maps and things and work with our education department to try to get kids to do kind of title search and, based on where they live and, relative to the 1870s map, allotment map, which there's also census information that went along with that mapping that shows who lived in the house, how many children, what they were worth, like their annual revenue and things. And so, back in the early time periods, the census was based for taxation and to figure out how many men they could muster in case of war. So that was the primary information that was gathered. It wasn't very detailed like census information today. But the thing in our favor is that, after 1870, in 1871, almost a year, it was I think a year and a month after we became incorporated as a town forcefully by the state, because there was a meeting held for that purpose to decide if we wanted to incorporate, and it was actually voted 48 to 52 opposed, so it didn't even get a majority, never mind a unanimous decision. So, they did it anyway, and so the state of Massachusetts, in violation of the Non-Intercourse Act. Following that, in 1871, Solomon Adequan actually became our first postmaster, and from there forward, there was every postmaster pretty much. There was only a couple non-natives sprinkled in between up until the 1940s, 1950s. I think even there was some try because Miss Ashley was even a postmaster, and then Yvonne Avant was even a postmaster. So I mean, up until recently, most of the past postmasters were tribal, and in those early 1900s, the one that was charged with enumerating the census, they were postmasters. And so you had tribal members going out and capturing that information, and so we should consider it accurate. And everybody in town, 1940s, 50s, they were 90% of the town was native. Everybody was native when you look at it. So that makes you feel good that everything they say and try and say about you not being native, and it's not accurate. History is written by the victor, and so it's not our story, it's their story. And so you have to read between the lines and interpret the information on your own and cross-reference and research everything. And it was interesting looking at the 1940 census and the 1950 census. My grandfather was raised in his family. At that time, he lived in the parsonage. My mother was born in the front room of the parsonage, the building we're trying to restore, just above the heron run. And so they also served as our first tribal council headquarters. And, you know, at the time when he was living there, shortly after my mother was born, 6 years after my mother was born, he was only making $300 or $350 a year. And that's what he was as a commercial fisherman. And that was his profession at the time. And, you know, I can't imagine raising a family on $350, but I know he was a good hunter. You know, he fed his family. My mother spoke of how they had plenty of food. They might not have money, but they always had food on the table. And so, you know, and when she lived in the parsonage and they had next to nothing, it was the best years of her life, and how much she enjoyed living in that house with no plumbing, no running water, no electricity, and how it was a joy to grow up in Mashpee. And, you know, how Uncle George, who lived at the museum, would round up the kids and they'd do controlled burns and burn off the fields, and all the kids would help with that, and how the communal structure supported one another, and that's what kind of helped us to get through was, you know, the collective help of the people. You know, everything was about helping each other to make it, and so that sense of community is what's bonded us and kept us here today.
Yeah, on to what you were saying earlier, David mentioned back in 2016, our land got challenged. We were ready to be taken out of trust, but we fought back, right? We went to court down in DC against the Department of Interior, because what they were saying, if you're not under federal jurisdiction by 1934, you can't be a people, so we can't take your land out of trust. So the lawyers were going back and forth. I remember hearing this like it was yesterday, right? The lawyers going back and forth. And we brought up Carlisle School. You guys heard of the Carlisle School? The Carlisle School is one of the first major boarding schools established after the Indian wars were over in the 1880s. And a lot of us as Mashpee Wampanoag people were taken, the children were taken and brought to this school, Carlisle School. Stripped of our language, stripped of our clothing, stripped of our adornment, our ways of doing things. And what happened, the person who made that Carlisle School, his famous slogan was, "Kill the Indian to save the man." And our people, the Mashpee Wampanoag people, were taken there from the 1880s to the 1920s, right? And remember what I said, you had to be in a federal jurisdiction by 1934. And the opposing parties were saying we weren't under federal jurisdiction, right? And I remember the judge, he was a very fair judge. He asked the Department of Interior's lawyer, "Do you know what the Carlisle School is?" She wouldn't answer. She would not answer that question. He asked her that 3 different times. The reason she didn't answer, if she's answered, she's already admitting guilt. Because the Carlisle School was under federal jurisdiction at that time, 1880. So that's and the judge's like, "I know what you're doing. I'm going to come back with my decision." Came back like a week later or so, and voted in our favor. So.
But the Morse report was another mechanism because, you know, to be considered for removal, then you were under federal jurisdiction, you know. And so the Morse report was another mechanism used to argue that we were under federal jurisdiction, you know. So there's different ways of looking at it. In my opinion, you know, you have 2 different issues. Our biggest issue is that we've never been afforded equal justice under the law. The law is actually on our side. If it was applied equally and justly, then things would be much different. But that's the predominant issue. And so, you know, with that, if you know, there's malfeasance on the state of Massachusetts for asserting that authority over the Indians in violation of the Constitution, the highest law of the land, which is unheard of anywhere else other than in dealing with the Indians. And the federal government was non-feasant in exercising their trust responsibilities respective to the Non-Intercourse Act. And so, you know, those are kind of 2 key issues that I think if they had been implemented differently, then things may be much uniquely different for us as a people. But you know, the Dawes Act was a mechanism used. Indian reservation systems kind of looked at Native Americans here and how they were put on plantations and districts early in the colonial period, and then that was even replicated. Hitler learned concentration camps and everything. That was the blueprint for that was taken from how America conquered the Indian lands. And so, there's when you look at how Harvard and different these highly respected institutions influence these things, there's a dark side of history that isn't always told. And but from our perspective, you read through all this history and stuff, and it's right there. It's plain. It's captured. It's all captured because here in the Northeast, everything is documented going all the way back to the 1600s. Any other questions? Yes, sir.
Yeah, so I just want to say how grateful I am to be in this class.
Thank you.
Thank you. And I have a bunch of questions, but one is, could you just describe a little bit about the relationship between the villages and the praying towns in terms of is the praying town inside a village? Is it, what's the distinction there? How does that all fall out?
As Darius had mentioned earlier, a lot of disease had wiped out a massive amount of our population. So prior to 1620, in 1615, 1616, the plague had come through and annihilated it. Estimates range from 2/3 to 3/4 of our population was wiped out. Some of the numbers go as high as 100,000, and some lesser numbers around 65 to 70,000. 2/3 of that, 3/4 of that wiped out. And so after that, then the colonists, when they started coming, roughly, I think it was 1,000 people per year in the first 5 to 10 years, and then it started accelerating even more than that. We quickly became outnumbered. And so, with that, the pockets of, our way of life is reliant on communal structure. And so when the tribes dwindle down to only a few, then you kind of have to merge with others to keep that communal structure, to share resources, especially through the winters when it's tough. In the summer months, you're eating fish, game, fowl, that kind of stuff, where you move communally more. You have larger family support in the wintertime, where you're hunting larger game and you're sharing the resources to make it through the winter collectively as larger family units. And so, the villages were, it's based on time period, I guess. What time period? And at the time period of praying Indian towns and things, there were 19 praying Indian towns throughout this Commonwealth. That's pretty much what was left for native communities. And
So did those kind of replace the villages, or were there villages and praying towns?
because essentially all the remnant tribal communities had a praying Indian town by the 1700s.
A lot of these people are taken forcefully from where they lived. And there was a big law that was made back in 1742, right? The state of Massachusetts called us remnants. They said if you're a remnant of a tribe in Massachusetts, you have to move to one of 4 locations. Okay, you gotta move to Grafton, which is where the Nipmunks are. You gotta move to Mashpee down here. You gotta move to Heron Pond, or you're gonna move to Aquina.
Okay.
We still had our original people down here, always been here, but the others were dispersed. So when it came to praying towns, that was a missionaries thing right there. Us bringing these Indians in and teaching them the right way how to do religion. And either you did it or you didn't do it. And some people died, got killed. And that was they were saying that's the blueprint of what the boarding schools became. Right there. Those 1640s, 50s, 60s of those praying towns. And that's what they looked at. They looked at them, boarding schools, but boarding schools looked at the praying towns.
And it's always been about the land. It's always been a land grab. So, when you look at Massachusetts and because the way our people govern, so our connection to land is through your mother. It is matrilineal. So our sachedoms and things, those boundaries and territories of your authority, it was based on your lineal descent. And so they were dynamic, they were always changing. Colonial don't like that. They wanted defined lines. So in 1671, they created that line, that imaginary line. It's a straight line. And it divided Plymouth Colony and Mass Bay Colony. that was unheard of. Like prior to that, there was no defining line between the Massachusetts people and Wampanoag people, Plymouth Colony and Massachusetts Bay Colony. That you know, it's always changing based on your lineal descent. And so, you know, it's an imaginary line that has significance in the colonial process, not process. And so, you know, because I mean, through the hereditary descent and based on your lineage, you know, your assertion of rule as a sachem may change. You know, it changes from generation to generation.
And when Mass Bay was established in 1630, there was an explosion of ships coming over, moving into Boston. So those numbers, it might have been a different way of thought with colonists first had thought in the 1620s. These people coming over in the 1630s had a different one. They didn't have to go back to Plymouth Colony. They had their own mindset of what they wanted to do to the land and to the people also, you know. That's why I'm telling you, go look at these digitalized records and you'll see the gradual decline between the relations between the two people, decade by decade by decade. It's over land, it's over laws that favor one side, it's over religion, because they start building their homes, right? Putting fences around where they lived. And you might say a native person walked across what they would call their backyard. You can't be here no more. This is mine. And we have no concept of way of thinking, you know? Right. Like when the first land sales that happened wasn't as they say, land sale was 1649. The 7 miles square of Bridgewater. They said, Mass Slay sold us this land for 7 shovels, a couple of moose hide. It's ridiculous, some trinkets. And I looked at this 7-mile land sale, they called it. And for us as the people, we're a very forgiving people, you know. If you want to come live amongst us, come live amongst us. If you want to come hunt amongst us, come hunt amongst us. Come fish. And we're a gifting people. So my thought is Mass is taking these as a gift. Thank you very much. Come on over. Not saying this 7-mile stretch now, square stretches, yours now.
Right, not a sale.
Different way
From
of
your
thought.
standpoint, it's not a sale.
If you live in the same way for thousands of years, that's what you know. I'm going to use a very famous quote by our former director of non-attachment, right? Very knowledgeable man. He unfortunately passed, but he would say if you live in the same way for thousands of years, and you got different people coming in, you got to think like how they think, because that's all you know. They can hopefully think like you. What else do you know? And not until later on in history does it change. They don't think like us. But by that time, it was too late.
And so Plymouth Colony, you have to put it in perspective. Plymouth Colony and Mass Bay Colony, they're competing corporate charters. They're businesses. They're not governments, they're corporate charters. And so they're competing for resource interest, monetary resource interest. So the Mass Bay Colony, they had their chief that they could buy land off of Chickasaw, and his son. And then Mass Bay Colony had their guy that they wanted to use, Massasoit and King Philip. And, it's in their best interest to have their guy sell them land because it increases the value of their holdings as a corporate charter, as a business. And so wait a minute, your native is saying he owns land over here. It was confusing for them, so they had to create a defined line to rationalize their land transactions. And so that's what created the line in 1671. It was a competing interest from a corporate structure.
And for
Neither one of them were governments at the time. I mean, when you really think about it, they weren't. They were a corporate structure.
And for you to understand what these two companies are doing, that's like that's not part of your model about what goes on, right?
In our way,
so to figure out a strategy in that environment is impossible.
In our way, you live on the land and it's never owned, it's borrowed, and you don't leave a lasting imprint on that land because you want to preserve and protect it for future generations, so that you live in a way that respects the environment, balance. We rotated our home sites every 7 to 10 years, so that you leave lasting impacts on one area. You cycle out also so that the ground has time to rejuvenate, to re-nourish itself, so you can come back to those fields and grow. So you did these things. You knew how to live in balance with your surrounding environment, and you did control burns before you left the summer home. You did them before you left the winter home, so that way you'd have berries come up and come back every year, and it promoted certain types of growth that supported you and your lifeways. And so when you think about how long we lived here for thousands of years. You know, we predate the Ice Age. You know, our oral histories and things tell us of speak of the last Ice Age. And so at one point, if you look at kind of modeling of maps and things, the coastlines change very significantly over the past thousands of years. If you look back 9,000 years, you could actually walk out to Martha's Vineyard in Nantucket, and you could walk out to George's Bank. The ice moraine, the Pleistocene ice sheet had pretty much stopped at what's now the coastline of Cape Cod now today. And so, but everything out in front of that, out to George's Bank, was exposed lands. And so there's an ancient lake in the middle of Nantucket Sound that's still there. If you look at Google Earth, you can still see it. It's in the middle of it. And it's fed by the Cotuit River. That's the oldest river around here. And so when the glacier started to melt and started to recede, then you know there was a significant amount of glacial deposits that were left at that coastal moraine at the edge of Cape Cod. And as it started to retreat, everything that it had picked up and gathered was left here. And so those things were gifts that created left for us to utilize as resources, you know, as nature's way of delivering these things to us. And so you respect them and honor them and appreciate them. And so, you know, but, you know, when you think about the scope of time that we've been here in this place, you know, and then in 400 years, you know, everything that we know and love has effectively been destroyed. You can't eat the fish from the fresh water. Mercury levels are so high in fresh water, I wouldn't eat any of the fish. You know, there's PFAS and forever chemicals in our surface waters as a result of military activities. You know, there's all these different things, you know, lack of infrastructure. They wanted to build everything, but they didn't put the infrastructure in. Now we have a water crisis where, you know, even our two primary bays, Walquay and Palpanistan, are becoming eutrophic. You know, everything is going to die in, you know, and where they were abundant. In my generation, 50 years ago, you know, our relatives saw the waters were so abundant, the eelgrass used to choke your motor out. You had to stop and pull out the eelgrass out of your motor because it was so abundant. The thriving environments loaded with scallops. You know, you could just reach down with tongs and pick up bushels at a time, half bushel at a time. You know, and now you don't have that. You know, because development, everybody came in and grabbed what they could and sold without building necessary infrastructure. And so, you know, these things have all challenged our way of life, and you know, we're trying to continue on. And now there's a renewed environmental awareness and things as society and things, and folks are starting to listen a little more. But you know, it's stuff we saw the writing on the wall for years, and you know, I don't know if anyone else has any questions.
Global warming is real, guys. But one to say it's not, it's real. Because what David was saying about water rising and we used to work in Nantucket, we just saw this last year. A body got exposed from our people from a burial. And what's that, I think that 7,000 years, if I recall?
I mean, it's actually an occurrence that happens all the time.
Yeah.
We just handle them discreetly, and we try not to publicize that kind of stuff. So, you know, because of erosion and stuff and things, there's remains that come out of banks and things all the time, and you know, so that we have to reinter them and put them back. You know, so stuff like that happens all the time. But sometimes the remains are exposed, and you know, they can look at around some of the stuff around them. And nowadays, technology's come a long way. So, like when we find shell middens and things, they can actually test the oyster shell and tell when it was harvested based on the hinge. They can tell when it was harvested, when it was taken from the water, how long it's been on the plant. And you know, some of those things go back, you know, 6,000, 7,000 years. You know, there's different indicators. You know, when they do the drilling for geotech and geophysical, as a result of some of the wind farms and stuff, they're finding, you know, molecules and things that are remnants of ancient submerged landforms and like the environments that grew in those time periods, flora and fauna. There's still evidence from those terrestrial environments, and which in our position, you know, those areas are sacred because they were resource areas at one point in time, and we would have lived out there when we were being pushed forward by the ice sheet. you know, and then as it proceeded, we came back.
One thing I'd like to plug real quick, guys, if you don't know about our Speakers Bureau, speakers presentations, we have that going on twice a month. And tomorrow, we have Danielle Green there, who's be speaking on food sovereignty. And you can register right on our website, go to the, yeah, right on our website, and you register, you get a link. Next Tuesday, coming up, you're gonna see Casey Thornborough, who's Mashpee Wampanoag also. He's gonna speak, he's an expert pretty much on tribal climate change. So if you're really interested in that, check us out next Tuesday. But tomorrow night's gonna be Danielle Green there. So.
I just wanted to say thank you for everyone for being attentive and listening. You know, as Jariah said, we're generous people, so we love to share, and you know, I got rubber gums, so I'll keep talking if you like. But I just love to share, and you know, I'm very proud of, you know, our history and all the culture, and you know, our time here. You know, I love to convey that and speak on it, and you know, feel free to reach out anytime to Darius or Roxanne or Latana, and you know, if you wanted other kind of get directed and be directed in kind of research material and things to develop. Always interested in developing more teaching tools and looking at our history through different lenses and focal points. And you know, there's a lot. So you know, generating GIS maps and things to kind of convey some of the information to our children and create teaching tools internally for our folks is stuff that, you know, directions we want to go in, always show on capacity and resources to do some of the things, but there's things we would like to work on as we move forward.
Also, August 16th, mark it on the calendar, guys, we have another professional development day at our government center. And you'll see us posting that probably in early May for you guys to register. Looks like August 16th on a Wednesday. But thank you guys have been very good.